challenges that lie ahead. Good afternoon, sir. How are you today?
Fine, thank you. And thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to come and talk about our work at KPLB.
Absolutely. I think it's essential, especially at the start of a new year.
Yeah.
Sir, let's get started off with what has been actually happening with regards to 2019. Of course, 2020 has already started. This year, the ministry has an 8.415 billion budget. Of course, the development budget is about 5.224. Now, with that in mind, you had mentioned to me just before we started that broadcast as well as broadband development would be one of the highlights. How are you actually going to be able to manage that, taking into account you still have to also provide the electricity, the roads, the water, and all of this all together for the ministry?
Sure. Infrastructure development in the rural areas, and in the old days, this was basically a decent road to the kampong, to the village, potable water, treated clean water, and 24-hour electricity was considered the basic infrastructure which we had to deliver. But of course, in today's age, we've had to add a fourth one, which is quality broadband connectivity. So, you know, in practically any village I visit, including Orang Asli villages in the remote areas, you know, repeatedly they will say, when are we going to get decent connectivity? This, you know, it's a fundamental part of modern life. So, infrastructure work takes up most of the budget. Actually, almost 80% of our development budget will be spent for roads and electricity and water. That's been a process even under the previous government, you know, and something we continue. Many of the projects we are doing now, the bigger projects, say for a large road project or water project, are not done in 6 months or 1 year. They're done over 4 or 5 years.
Naturally.
So some of the stuff we're doing now is a continuation of the previous government's initiatives. We, of course, from 2018, we have also started our own initiatives. So it's an ongoing process, you know. But what I'd like to highlight is we have some major challenges. I started my work as Deputy Minister in July.
That's right, so coming into roughly about 18 months
18
then.
months or so. And in that time, of course, like my minister, I've traveled all over the country, Sabah, Sarawak, north to south in Semenanjung, and going to the ground, visiting the villages, seeing the realities on the ground. And believe me, it is somewhat surprising. We face a major challenge in the sense that the disparities between infrastructure development, in particular between Sabah, Sarawak and Semenanjung are major. That goes without saying, you know. There are probably up to a couple of thousand villages. Malaysia, we have a database of about, let's say, 16,000 villages all over the country, including Sabah, Sarawak.
And in its totality, roughly 24% of the Malaysian population lives
correct.
in the rural arears.
But in Sabah, Sarawak, the rural population goes up to 40%.
Very true.
Semenanjung is about 20%. So we are in Semenanjung, we are largely an urban population.
So when it comes to the rural economy, YB,
Yes.
what are some of the features that you have seen which is most lacking, particularly in critical zones? Like you were saying, Kelantan, for example, has 7 of the poorest districts in all of Malaysia.
Absolutely. We use this is one of our benchmarks, which we are going to monitor closely for the next 5 years, particularly in the Rancangan Malaysia ke-12, the 12 Malaysia plan. We've listed the 28 poorest districts in Malaysia. And, you know, you'll be shocked to find out 7 are in Kelantan out of 28, which is really a shocking statistic. We've identified 2 in Kedah, 1 in Pahang, 5 in Sabah, and 13 in Sarawak.
That's right.
So you can see the
legacy
main
issues
legacy
as well,
issues. So basically, so back to infrastructure, there's this major gap, you know, when you compare the roads, the water. Hundreds of villages in Sabah, Sarawak do not have clean water and do not have basic electricity supply. There are villages, homes in particular, they can't afford generators, so they'll be lighting oil lamps till today. In Kudat, in Pitas, in Sarawak, in Sabah, sorry, in the poor areas. This is the reality. So for me, this is not acceptable. Malaysia is a middle-income country, upper middle-income country when we look at ourselves in the world, you know, where we rank ourselves. And it is not right that, you know, thousands of Malaysians are still living in rural areas in such conditions. So these are the challenges that we face. And of course, we are going to deal with them, but it's going to take time. So even in Semenanjung, for example, when I visited, say, Jeli in Kelantan, I was shocked to find over 100 villages still using air bukit or water from the hills. You know, you tap a source from the hill and you
meaning it's
bring
untreated as well.
Untreated. That's the point. Of course, in those days it was clean, you know, but now because sometimes of agriculture,
Even
and
environmental pollution
pollution
levels are
and so on.
different.
The water is not entirely safe, and people have to boil it, and which is a lot, it takes money, it's an energy, and so on. So we have these kind of issues, legacy issues from the previous government, where we have basically uneven development. And so from what I see, infrastructure is fundamental. If a kampong doesn't have a decent road going up to it, that kampong cannot improve itself economically. The poor will continue to remain poor.
Very true.
They will remain
They're trapped in a cycle of poverty.
in a cycle of subsistence living. So we have to break that. We have to bring the road, and we don't need an expensive road. We just need a basic road that allows them to communicate, and then bring them clean water, electricity, and of course today's modern demand, broadband connectivity, basically.
That's right. Now, YB, if you could spend a little bit of time on what your vision is towards changing development models so that the rural economy, human capital, all of this can actually be brought together a lot more cohesively and a lot quicker as well.
When you say changing models, I think for me personally, having seen the current models, which really, in the ministry, of course, because our civil servants basically carry on what has been practiced for many years in the past from the previous government. The problem I see is sometimes we are using expensive models to deliver even just water and electricity. From what I see now, like as I said, we have about 5.2 billion for development.
Correct.
80% of that is for infrastructure, for expanding water and electricity access. But the approach of the past, and unfortunately still being carried on, which we need to rethink, is using expanding the current electric grid or the water grid, which is fine where there are sufficient numbers population. So you have a large cluster of villages close by, the numbers make it economically feasible. But even then, we use benchmark figures like 100,000 to 120,000 per house.
Exactly.
That's very expensive.
And you were mentioning earlier that currently you would be looking more towards a model that is below 50,000 ringgit per house.
It has
How
to be,
can that be made
I would think even
actionable?
less than that, because today the benefit we have today, as opposed to perhaps 20 years ago, we have technology.
That's right. Materials are much cheaper.
Technology is there.
Supply chains as well.
So we have various alternative technologies for electricity generation, micro hydro, solar technology, etc. Even for clean water, there are cheaper, effective ways of providing potable clean water to the house, as opposed to doing the expensive, massive, expansion of the grid. So that thinking has to change. And otherwise, what I fear is that there will be large numbers of people in Sabah and Sarawak, and even mostly, who will be waiting for perhaps a couple of decades before they ever see this infrastructure. And I think that's not fair.
And not done either.
It's not done,
and
yeah.
under budget 2020 at least, YB, there's been 1 billion ringgit set aside for road infrastructure throughout Malaysia, primarily with a focus on Sabah and Sarawak. How do you see this panning out through the next 5 to 10 years even?
Yeah, these are the allocations which we do annually. And likewise, we will be asking for probably increased amounts when we discuss the 12 Malaysia plan. But again, as I said, currently the approach we need to rethink some of the previous models we have used. The emphasis now seems to be using what I call JKR style pricing, which is, for me, in my personal view, very high. We don't need sometimes...
And that might be fine for urban highways but not suitable for the rural
state
areas.
roads and so on. But the kampong doesn't want a Rolls-Royce road. They just want a simple road. So we should be rethinking our models and providing... There are technologies today where good roads can be provided cheaper. So some of that mindset needs to be moved along, But I think these are some of the challenges there that I see, because our budgets are going to be limited. We don't have unlimited amounts of money to spend. Our budgets for rural development will continue to be around this level, 5 or 6 billion for all this infrastructure. So we need to learn and how to make the dollar
go a little further.
That's right.
And what are some of the ideas or proposals that you actually have, YB, with regards especially to increasing the value of each ringgit when it comes to the rural area, particularly for B40 housing?
Yeah, housing, what we are looking at, and we've been doing this from last year. Minister Rina Harun has been stressing this, the use of IBS technologies to try and reduce the cost, and we have brought it down about 10 to 20%. And I think we can even go further by perhaps For example, let's say in a kampong of where we are trying to build 5 homes for the really poor, what we call the hardcore poor.
That's right.
That we could even go reduce cost by trying to do a gotong royong or cooperative method.
Bringing the community together.
Getting the community involved, giving them the materials, paying them a bit of money, where we wouldn't be paying, like say, commercial prices to build those houses. So there are a lot of models, which we can use. In Sabah, for example, the very common demand is their hanging bridges over all their many rivers which they have.
Right.
And they build them themselves.
Bridges.
So when we replace them, we don't need to use contractors. We can just engage the community and pay perhaps half the price.
Right.
So these are some of the approaches. And like I said, for water, electricity, and roads, just basically current technologies. Today's technologies are available that allow us to do them effectively at lower prices. But of course, sometimes procurement practices of the past, contractors all get used into a particular way of doing things, and it is a challenge to shift the behavior.
Yes, from that SOP that they've had for so long.
So, but that's a process, and we're working at it. There are discussions, and of course we've started, for example, with open tender processes.
That's right.
Also
but that's
standard
part of
for
the
all.
Pakatan Harapan government's
Exactly,
mandate.
throughout the whole government. So that has helped us a lot, of course, to get better value for the development dollar. But we, as I said, we need to be looking, especially for many remote rural areas, really alternative models. Yeah.
So from cost-effective development measures, YB, let's move into human capital.
Sure.
Workforce development, marketability, training, even training centers. Now this is also something that has been brought into a much bigger scale ever since yourself and YB Rina Harun have also come into the ministry. What is the progress with regards to upskilling those who are part of the rural economy, particularly those who want to be part of the digitalized economy in Malaysia?
I'll start with the digitalized economy. As I said earlier, our main obstacle today is basically the lack of infrastructure. So until we fix the infrastructure side, we can't really move that.
Yes, you won't see much shift.
We won't see much shift. But I'm confident that this year, 2020, based on what my discussions with YB Gobin, the Minister for Multimedia and Communications, he's very focused on delivering quality rural broadband this year.
That's right.
And he's got
equitable
a plan.
access as well.
He's got a rollout plan. And we'll be working closely with him. We are, for example, starting with, we have about 190 over what we call community centers, rural community centers, Pusat Community Desa in all over the country. We will make that like an internet hotspot for a start. But of course, ultimately what we want is, we want to cover as many of the rural villages with access to quality broadband. Once you deliver that, I think of course then we also have to do training and so on, create awareness of the opportunities, develop the skills, and then those who are inclined to use that infrastructure to build small businesses,
the entrepreneurs,
they will start by themselves.
That's right.
Because we've given them
quite organic almost.
Exactly. But we need the infrastructure in place. But in the meantime, what we've been doing, and I must say this has been done previously by the previous government, we're carrying on, although we are now enhancing what was done in the past.
What's different about the way in which the ministry is approaching it now?
Okay, well, let me identify the agencies so people understand. We have 2 main agencies where we do human capital development. One, of course, MARA is the main one that people recognize.
That's right.
MARA is a huge agency under us, a statutory body. It runs fairly independently, but we monitor it closely and engage with it. And beneath MARA, there are a huge number of there's Get Mara and so on, a lot of training centers and also entrepreneur development programs. So Mara delivers a large chunk of what we do in the rural areas in terms of human capital development, entrepreneur development and so on. Likewise, we also have another department, this is a department under the ministry directly called KEMAS. KEMAS is basically a kindergarten setup. We run approximately about 11,000 kindergartens in all the remote areas in villages in Malaysia. The Ministry of Education kindergartens stop at the school.
Right.
Ours goes one step further into the village. So it brings the kindergarten facility direct to the kampong. So the Kemas setup is not just meant for the kids. It is also meant to, we run adult programs.
Understood.
So we do skills training of different levels and so on. And some of it includes entrepreneur development and so on.
So 11,000 outfits nationally.
11,000, yes, what do you call it? Kindergartens are running, but in each area, let's say each district, each dun or parliament, there are teams of Kemas personnel who will be organizing programs specifically for the adults in the village. So that's the other delivery mechanism which we have. So through these two, we are continuing the work of the past. This time though, the emphasis on women entrepreneurs has been stepped up.
Yes, that's right. There are several programs such as WISE, WINS,
Correct.
HERS, not only women empowerment programs, but
Yes.
also for leadership as well as
Correct.
political
Yes.
development.
So this is pretty much, shall we say, something Minister Rina Harun is very committed to, and coming from a business, being a woman entrepreneur herself, she's very passionate about this. And we are making some good progress here. The numbers have stepped up and so on compared to the past.
That's right. So there has been a lot of movement, particularly towards upskilling and upscaling those who are working within the rural economy itself. From there, YB, I'd like to, for a short while, shift into the focus of also another phenomenon which is occurring, which is that there is a small movement of those from urban areas of Malaysia migrating to rural areas.
Yes, that does happen. Excuse me. What I think, but I need to qualify that. In certain rural areas where there's decent infrastructure,
Right.
in particular broadband and connectivity, then there is a certain pull factor, where
Understood.
especially young people,
Right.
young people are quite happy to stay in the kampong, do business on the internet, earn a living, enjoy the environment of the rural areas and the social setup and so on.
Understood. So
But
on that note, YB, I'll just jump in so that we can go into a quick commercial break.
Sure.
We'll be back right after. Do stay tuned for the rest of the nation.
Harimau Melaya ni haiwan yang gagah berani, tadi didapati di dalam hutan belantara dan sinonim dengan panggilan Raja Rimba. Pada tahun 1950-an didapati lebih 3,000 ekor harimau, tetapi amat sedih sekali sekarang ni didapati cuma kurang pada 200 ekor saja. Harimau Melaya diburu untuk memenuhi pasaran gelap. Pemburu haram menggunakan jerat dan akibatnya harimau kita menderita. Semua rakyat Malaysia perlu berganding bahu untuk menyelamatkan harimau Melaya.
YB Sivarasa, so going a little bit deeper into the Ministry of Rural Development and also the role and the mandate. Now, of course, unlike many other countries, Malaysia, though, for some reason, has never paired together the Ministry of Agriculture together with the Ministry of Rural Development. What are some of the challenges that arise out of this, and how are yourself as well as individuals in the Ministry of Agriculture trying to overcome?
Sure. You're absolutely right. This is something I've observed in my international meetings. When I meet my counterparts from many other countries, I find the majority of countries actually pair them under one roof, agriculture and rural development, because I think they correctly see that good quality agricultural development is key to lifting people out of poverty in rural areas. You can't build large factories in rural areas. Of course, you can develop crafts skills, which we are doing also. You can develop rural tourism, but that will always be a minority. Not everybody can run a
niche market as well.
Exactly. Not every area is suitable for tourism. Not everybody has got craft skills.
Very true.
But the majority, the huge majority, have land and often live off the land. The problem today is they are living in a subsistence level most of the time, and this is what we want to lift them above. We need to take them, out of that. So, but unfortunately, my counterparts for agriculture in a different ministry, they look after fishermen, farmers, and agriculture as a whole.
That's right. Who at the same time, though, they live in the areas where the Ministry of Rural Development has a mandate.
So, for example, when I visited Baling and Yan in Kedah,
right,
beautiful areas, green, land available, but high levels of poverty. It really makes you wonder, something's wrong, there's a mismatch here. And the Prime Minister last year, when he launched the Pembangunan Luar Bandar 2030, our long-term development plan, 2030, he gave us a clear message that day about saying, look, you have to work on agriculture. And that is the way. Smart agricultural practices, reform, how you proper land use is the way to lift people up.
And even, of course, some technology in agriculture, which is another aspect of
exactly. So that is what we are now looking at. We've already started discussion. We have started some pilot projects. But this is going to take a massive effort, a massive rollout throughout the whole country. And it's going to take a detailed look at villages, looking at their land, looking at the ownership of the land, how to better use the land, and then combine it with smart agricultural practices. And that is the way, finally, in the long term, we're going to lift the economic level of people in the villages and take many of them above, out of the subsistence level.
That's right.
So but that's a long-term challenge, But we're starting at it. Previously, the previous government, in particularly 2-3 decades ago, seemed to focus more on industrialization. But today, we have left, because of that, we have left a legacy where we import huge amounts of food, 50 billion food bill.
Very true.
And we're not using our...
We're not food secure either, despite producing so much food.
And we have a fair amount of arable land which is not being used properly. And at the same time, income levels are affected in the rural areas. So this is a major thing for us, but it's going to take a lot of close work with our colleagues in the Ministry of Agriculture.
That's right.
Yeah.
So for 2020 as well, KPLB has 77 target programs
Correct.
to benefit rural smallholders as well as farmers and fishermen. So this is also to be giving together targeted subsidies to avoid wastage and abuse. Now, there are many things which are happening on the ground itself. What do you feel will be the most important component in ensuring that socio-economically as well as human capital-wise, the rural economy is able to move towards that 2030 goal that we have currently?
Sure. I must qualify that a bit. The 77 programs and ongoing process is not just for this year.
That's right.
It's
correct.
part of that entire rollout for Pembangunan Luar Bandar, the Rural Development Plan 2030. Direct subsidies for fishermen, farmers are really regulated more by the Ministry of Agriculture. So our area of focus is making sure the basic infrastructure is there, and besides that, wherever we can, of course, we also try to identify hardcore poverty, and try to resolve that, so that so that at least that level of that group of persons who fall within the hardcore poor are raised out of it. But of course, then comes the next level, which is the generally poor who need to be raised out of a subsistence level of living. That is more of a bigger challenge, because that is about land use and looking at a different way of planting crops. The tendency of the past is to plant kelapa sawit, and getah, oil palm and rubber.
That's right. No biodiversity.
Yes, but that has become a problem, because when commodity prices drop,
naturally
then everybody starts suffering. Yeah, exactly.
That's right. So YB Sivarasa, as we're moving in towards the end of the show, what would be a final message as the overall mandate for the ministry for 2020?
Well, it's a very important part of Malaysia's development that we ensure that the rural populations is treated equitably and gets a fair share of the wealth of this country. And I think that's the responsibility we carry now in the ministry. And as I said earlier, we've inherited some major challenges from the previous government, the way they ran things for the last 6 decades. And the
Very
most
true.
obvious one is now for us to actually reduce the gap between Sabah, Sarawak and Semenanjung. And of course, to reduce some of the gap within even Semenanjung itself. We need to make sure.
Thank you so much for your time today. It's been absolutely wonderful getting a deeper insight into how actually the Ministry of Rural Development has been working. We wish you all the best not just for 2020, but to reach 2030's goals and beyond.
Thank you for having us here.
So there you have it. Yang Berhormat Sivarasa Rasiah, who is Deputy Minister of Rural Development for Malaysia, with me, Tamina Kaushi, here on The Nation, only on Bernama TV. We'll see you again next time.
Mengupas isu semasa, merangkumi politik, ekonomi, sukan serta hiburan, membawakan anda agenda pentas dunia.
Wartawan bernama menceritakan pengalaman mencari dan mengumpul berita.
Malaysia juga turun dengan misi balas dendam.
Pengalaman wartawan bernama mendapatkan maklumat di setiap negeri di Malaysia.
Tapi bila kita balik, kita tak boleh kata kita tak ada berita.